All right, people of the internet, welcome to Atheist Edge. We're back once again, and I'm joined today with Mark Reid. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm fairly well, a little tired, but I'm doing well.
Awesome. It's so good to have you, man. I'm really grateful for you to be here today. I
Yeah.
am
I mean, we go way back, right? Like we go back to the dark days of modern day debate and stuff. Yeah.
the dark, dark days.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm hoping if there's any issues with the stream, post somebody in the chat will let us know. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and get into it. And I just
Yeah.
want to
Let's do
say,
it.
everybody, it's good to see you, Maya. Good to see you, Robin Webster, Lance, everybody that's here and who will be watching in the future. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Mark, I wanted to talk
Yeah.
to you today about
Mhm.
morality because we have differing opinions. We are both atheists, but we
Yes.
have different ideas about what morality is. Can you give the people a quick little rundown of what your position is?
Um. So I'm a meta-ethical relativist. So basically, meta-ethics is sort of meta-ethics is sort of what the goal of your morality is, like where it's trying to lead you. So I think that morality is granted by having a particular aim in mind, and whether it gets you to that goal or doesn't get you to that goal. Um, the the actions that lead you towards the meta-ethical result, right? So, for example, I'm a secular humanist, so I think human well-being, both of mental, physical, societal well-being, is the goal that I'm trying to get to. So that's my meta-ethical framework. The actions that I can take are kind of objective within that. Like cutting people's heads off obviously won't get you there. That is objectively true. But I think that the goal itself is relative. It's basically changes for each person, or rather, it can change for each person. Usually, there is a sort of compatibility with people's goals over a society, and that sort of provides a population's moral meta-ethical framework. But I don't see anything objective about that. So that's really where I'm coming from.
Okay, I understand. And I've obviously heard a lot of people say things along similar lines in the past. Uh,
Hmm.
in preparing for this, I listened to I started to listen, so I didn't get to finish the whole thing, but I did get to listen to your opening statement and Praise I Am's opening statement for that morality debate that you guys did.
Oh, did I do one with him? Probably. Yeah, possibly.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, it was a
sure.
while
Why
ago.
not?
It was years ago.
Yeah,
But
really old. Yeah.
yeah, but it was a good debate, and I was very interested in your argument because there were things that you were saying that I would probably use to argue that there is an objective foundation to moral ideas.
Right.
You were talking about those seven traits that are demonstrated to be was it universal, global? Am I using the right term there?
Well, I use the term ubiquitous because it isn't
Ubiquitous.
like not every single society demonstrates these particular traits. You have like so. Okay, so really, there's two things that I think morality comes down to. Maybe just to clear things up, I'm just wondering how you define morality, like what you see as what morality actually is, just so we can be on the same page here.
Okay, so my idea of what morality actually is something akin to the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line or a geodesic in curved space
Okay.
time, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
it's like an inch is the objectification of length or centimeter, however you want to use it, right? Uh,
Okay.
we take we agree upon a certain amount of length. We say that this is our objective. We're going to
Hmm.
use this ruler or whatever you're using to measure against it, and
Right.
in that way, we create morality.
Okay.
Does
Yeah,
that
I
make sense?
don't disagree. Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. So the way that I look at morality, it's basically sort of you're sort of going to morality as a sort of in a pragmatic approach. How do we get to this place? Basically, I don't have a problem with that at all. But morality to me is the code of conduct that all reasonable people should agree on over a population kind of thing. So if we have sort of a population in a country, morality should be what they ought to do, or the shortest distance to where they want to get to. And I completely agree with that. That's no problem. I get what you're saying. So yeah, I get, right, I'm on board. And your other question was the two things. So I think that morality and what we ought to do, or really how we manage to work morality into a population, is due to empathy and reciprocity, right? So we've got these two fundamental feelings. I mean, I call them feelings, but really they're rooted in pro-social behaviors that have evolutionarily arisen. And we see these in monkeys, in other social species like flamingos, and just all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And not only that, but cross species as well, like a bison helping another animal against a crocodile kind of thing for no particular reason. So but while I think that sort of empathy and reciprocity are important for how we evaluate what we ought to do, or morality, it doesn't actually tell us what to do. It only makes us feel a certain way. It only gives us feelings about things. So
Right.
Empathy, for instance, you have mirror neurons that tell you the feelings of other humans, but unfortunately, it doesn't really cross over to people you see outside of your social dynamic or your social group, like the other tribe. That empathy response doesn't come sometimes. So I think it can guide us, but I don't think that is a code of conduct. I think it just gives us information about, how we would feel in that position, and how the person opposite us actually does feel. So to me, and you've sort of said that it's the shortest distance between 2 points, but how do you get the end goal?
How do you get the end goal? Okay, so
Right.
The way that I conceptualize it is that all life shares a specific goal: perpetual survival. And from that goal, we extrapolate all these different avenues of attaining that goal. We try all these different ways, life itself. And because we all have that goal, we can see a objective way of delineating the best ways to obtain that for all beings. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I get what you're getting at, that we're driven to survive kind of thing. I think that I think that when I think about it, even though we're driven to survive, if you're talking evolution and that's one of our drivers, that's not like always the case kind of thing. We don't follow that evolutionary drive to survive and reproduce at all times. I think that the locusts, for instance, that overpopulate and then destroy themselves, I'm not sure that is what they ought to be doing. I think there's bigger things that we can say, hey, if they were more intelligent, they would say, hey, let's control population and not decimate the landscape in order to breed as much as possible. So I get the idea of sort of surviving and thriving. I do get that idea, but I still think that is a stance. Like, that is a stance by the organism, that there is nothing independent that's set out there in the universe that says this species must survive.
Oh yeah, I'm not, by no means am I saying that there's some kind of ultimate, absolute, universal moral code that one could know. My idea is more like our eyes, they see green, right?
Sure.
But green is not necessarily a feature of the universe. There's an electromagnetic spectrum. There are certain waves that there are certain frequencies. Our brains create the image of those electromagnetic waves as green in our head, but that isn't necessarily the reality, right? And in that way, we are sensing the reality of good and bad, let's say, when we use empathy and what was the other one you said? Empathy
reciprocity.
And reciprocity, right? We're sensing that, but it's not like good or bad is baked into the atoms or is a force of the universe. It's more like a function of the interplay of the features of the universe, which we are. We are entities in the universe that interplay objectively. We are actual things, and how those things interact, there is a better and worse way to do that.
Well, yeah, but it sort of goes to the point of if you want to survive and thrive, how do you make the choice between what we ought to do in order to do that? Like, will killing the next tribe over be the best choice to do that, or will the teaming up with that tribe and cooperating be the best way to do that? That largely depends on the other tribe and what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do. A lot of it is stance dependent on not only your own stance on how you perceive the other tribe, but also how that other tribe perceives you and how they're acting towards you. It's not really enough to sort of say, well, we're interplaying with this, but also we've got to say, well, it has to give us some kind of ought. And just because I think David Hume put it very succinctly, you can't get an ought from an is. Like, just because something is a certain way or you feel a certain way doesn't really give you an ought from that. Like, it doesn't actually give you well, you should perform this action because of this thing. A good example, because I'm not sure if that made sense.
No, it does. I've heard the argument before. Just before you go, no, go ahead. You just go ahead.
So you've got to amputate a leg, right? It's harmful for the person, kind of thing, and it is generally horrible. We have to train people to do it because generally we don't want to do it. Your empathy feels for the person. You wouldn't like the same thing done to you, but because we can extrapolate upon the far-reaching consequences and not just our emotions of, well, this is going to hurt and, that person's going to suffer and this sucks, I don't want to do this, we can actually overcome that and say, hey, we ought to do that because it's better for them and our own society if we do, amputate legs that are going to kill somebody.
Okay, let's stick with that example for a second.
Okay.
So there's your current knowledge of what the situation is, whatever that may be. The person's leg is damaged. Your opinion is they need to take it off if they want to live, right? Now, we already agreed that there's this common goal of perpetual survival that is loosely related to this, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, he wants to keep his leg, obviously, right? You think that it's the best thing for him to take it off. Right. But there's the fact of the matter. Now, depending on the context, right? If you are in Civil War America, where there is no antibiotics or advanced medical treatment, then the facts of the case will dictate what is the actual right thing to do, given the goal of him surviving, right? Of everyone surviving. Now, if saving his life leads to other death or something like that, then that changes the calculus a little bit, right? When we're trying, when I look at it, I say everything that is alive has this goal. So we're all sharing in this. And if we respect that goal in each other, we get cooperation. And I think that just shows you that there is this, let's say, laminar flow that you can achieve in this moving ball of atoms that we exist in,
Yeah, I get that every sort of organism has that drive within it. I do get that, but it doesn't sort of get you to, for number one, I still think it is a stance. Like, even if everybody in the world shared that same opinion of, oh, I'm driven to survive, it still is a stance because self-sacrifice happens all the time.
But it's not an opinion, right? You wouldn't call it an opinion.
What do you mean? Of course it's an opinion.
The stance, I want to survive, right?
Yes.
Or I am a living thing and therefore I want to survive, let's say.
Yes.
That is, wouldn't you agree that that is also a fact of the reality?
Well, would you agree that can change? Like if someone throws themselves on a grenade?
Yeah, yeah, I guess that can change. Yeah, it gets complicated when we talk about self deletions of a different
Yes.
varieties. Maybe we
Yeah.
should just go straight into that then, because that's the where it gets complicated, right? The way I look at it is that the fact of the matter is all the beings share in this ought desire, this goal, and if you have a
Mm.
goal, from that goal you can derive oughts of that goal. So if we all share in that goal, then it is objectively shared between all of us. So we have a shared morality. It may not be absolute or universal, but it can be objective. It can be something that we can all
Yeah.
look at and measure against.
So just for the audience, absolute means that it never changes. It's unchanging, not just objective. So an absolute stone would never change position or something like that. That's what absolute means. And universal means it's over the um, um, everybody and everything has the same thing. So physics is universal, for instance, stuff like that. So just
Mm-hmm.
and I get that. I don't think that universality, as far as sort of positions on things, necessarily makes them objective. Like even if everybody in the world agreed that ice cream is nice, it still doesn't mean that's an objective fact. It is something that comes even independent of anybody existing in the world. It is still a fact. And it isn't reliant on any stance. So even if that stance is biologically driven, I still think it's a stance on it. And the fact that you can have individuals or even large groups self-delete for the good of others means that sort of an appeal to survival and thriving. I mean, it may cover the population, but it certainly won't cover individuals, because we do see, heroic bravery of people that, want to save their friends, or, help their country, or do other things that will help people, even though it means they do not survive.
Right. I mean, even at the cellular level, you have cells that go through
Sure.
apoptosis, right? That's the word, where
Mm.
they, self delete in order to provide for the
Yeah.
good of the tissue or whatever organ it might
Yes.
be in,
Yeah.
right? Um, when we look at ourselves as individuals, it gets it's less obvious how this plays out. But when we consider ourselves in the context of a community, a population, then we see that your individual survival may not be the necessary endpoint of this. It might actually be that you're trying
Mhm.
to help your community survive, or your children, or your progeny, or whatever. Right? They are still part of you in a way that is not it's not super clear, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, and that's where I'm sort of pushing back against, because it depends on the individual and the population. Like some people don't really care about society and they only care for themselves. Some people do care about society and their aim is to make society a better place in general. So I don't think the idea of having an end goal is as universal as you're sort of making it out to be, because I
But
think that people generally have different ideas of what they want their goal to be.
okay, but so check this out. When we look at
Yep.
I look at it like this: there's a population I call life, right? Once a being in that population is no longer sharing in that perpetual survival goal, and they self delete, they're no longer in that category anymore.
Yeah.
So, by definition, as long as you are alive, some part of you is pushing to survive. It may not be a conscientious thing or decision that you're making on a your frontal lobe kind of situation, but even the involuntary drives that cause your heart to beat, that cause you to
Mhm.
breathe when you, even though you hold your breath, you can hold your breath as long as you want to. You'll pass out and then you'll just start breathing
Oh
again.
yeah, sure,
You
sure.
know,
I mean,
your body.
yeah.
I mean, we have to be really reductive. You know, when we make things so like I am an individual. That means when I self delete, that negates my perpetual survival goal. But I'm not just an individual. I'm a member of a society. I have connections to other things. It's not
Right.
so simple, right? And yeah, I think I just want to stop for a second and let you talk.
No, well, I guess I'm sort of pushing back where what gives one person the idea to uphold a societal structure and sort of say, hey, the most important thing is America or Australia or this ideal of, you know, the country for God, king and country kind of thing. And what gives another one the idea that, hey, the people are the most important thing rather than, for instance, this structure. And another one just say, well, I'm the most important thing and I just want to, you know, have a happy life kind of thing. So
Hmm.
the idea that we're sort of, and I get what you mean. Like if you are all trying to survive and thrive, then, you know, there'll be one optimal way. And I kind of agree with that. But I think that that goal that you're trying to head towards varies from person to person a lot more than just, well, I want to survive and thrive. I think that we hold up some ideals as worth fighting and even dying for. I think we hold up, and you know that might cover, you know, a whole range of populations, for instance,
Hmm.
up to in the point where, you know, if we go extinct, we, you know, some people are prepared for that. Say if we can't hold up those ideals, then we should go extinct. If we can't, you know, overcome this thing, then because evolutionarily speaking, there does seem to be something that elevates a surviving population over an extinct one. Like there's no, well, that population is good for surviving. The extinct one performs a function as well. It's weeded out of the gene pool. It doesn't get to continue and therefore makes the resulting population stronger in the process or more fit in the process, I guess, on average. So the way that I'm looking at it, there's nothing saying, nothing objective saying, hey, humans have to be surviving rather than go extinct.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I don't think that, like I said, it's not a universal and absolute. There's no moral
Mm,
lawgiver to appeal to in any kind of way. We have a sense of, like, we just have a sense of sight, and therefore we can see paths. We can determine shortest distances and whatever. Right? In that way, we can sense good or bad because it doesn't exist if we don't exist. Before humans, before life, there was no good or bad. It only exists because there are these two different entities to interact with. It's like government, right? Government is not a real feature of reality. You won't
yeah, it's a
find
social
government in
construct.
a
Yeah.
right, but it's not an illusion. Let's say, right? It's not like
No, it's a social construct.
yeah, and I think that morality is more fundamental than a social construct in that it exists in ubiquitously across all life forms, but it's not. Or what's I
See,
saying?
I disagree. I disagree with that. I've had this debate, and apparently I've lost completely against Bumblebee, who does hive science. She kicked my ass, and I am not afraid to admit it. Look, I don't think animals have a moral system. They sort of, as far as I'm aware, and this is what I will posit, they have sort of a proto morality. It approaches morality because,
Yeah,
like for instance, capuchin monkeys, right? If one of them, they put somebody on sentry, that sentry makes an alert if there's a snake. The other monkeys are gathering stuff. They'll all scatter into the trees, kind of thing. Sometimes that capuchin monkey will make the sound even though there's no snake in order to get the food for himself. Like he lies essentially. And if
right.
they found out, they're usually kicked out of the troop. They're basically thrown out. So you could sort of say, hey, that's approaching morality. But um, going back to my definition, it's sort of a code of conduct, which they react in a certain way because they feel it's not fair, but there's nothing codified there. There's nothing sort of encapsulated saying, hey, if this happens, then this will happen. Sometimes they're not kicked out. Sometimes the leader of the troop likes them. It's really just sort of okay, we can see they're on their way to morality. We can see they're on their way to having a solid, rigid code of conduct that if somebody violates it, there are these specific consequences for it. But I don't think it raises to the level of morality. Sort of not like humans and, if you kill someone, then you're killed in the olden days. And now we're sort of, well, if you unalive somebody, you're put into prison kind of thing where you can't do that again. Like, we have this moral system of if something occurs, something has to occur in order to make that right or provide some kind of purpose, what we ought to and ought not do. So I think it's just a layer of with animal. No other animal has that code of conduct.
Maybe we're having a semantic difference here, because
maybe
what you said, I agree with. Like, I obviously, it's factually true, but like the way that you framed it is also the way I agree with it. It's a proto kind of morality. It's not, the epitome of morality. It's not like they have any law books or anything like that, but they definitely have behaviors that are better or worse that they've figured out somehow over the eons, right? So, but see, that to me, it indicates that there's something there that we're all pointing towards.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Like laminar flow. When you have water molecules going through a certain area, right? If there's a turbulence, it's not going to flow very evenly, and it's going to be choppy and whatever. But if you, I don't know the parameters. I don't know how to do it. It's just saying you adjust the system properly, and now you have a free flowing water that looks good, that's easy to use, whatever it is, it suits your goals better. And in that way, we develop these codes, these behaviors, and it's not just humans, but even, like you said, capuchin monkeys, they have certain behaviors that they have learned over time that is what morality is. It's figuring out how to get along with other things.
Well, they react in a certain way because, and I agree that they have that same sense we do, because, like I said, it's based upon empathy and reciprocity, and monkeys, just the same as humans, have those two senses as well. It seems to be a common theme within social species in evolution. Absolutely, no doubt. But what we can do, and this brings me back to that sort of, amputation of the leg, we can go, well, I don't want to do that. That's horrible. And it doesn't make sense and it's awful, but I'm going to overcome my reaction about it and go, okay, this moral system says that I want to keep people alive, even if they're in pain, even if, all of those sort of add-ons, and say, okay, well, I'm going to overcome that. I'm going to basically do that thing, which I know they won't like and I don't like, but because I can say that reasonably it is the best thing to do. And so that sort of end goal isn't, the monkeys won't go, well, that one's in pain, let's amputate a leg because they're in pain and, it's going to be infected and things. So I think it is the foresight to go, well, we're not just reacting, we're constructing this. Well, if I want people to survive in my society. And this is where I think that moral or at least meta-ethical relativism takes a hold, is basically saying it's not deriving an ought from an is. It's not just saying, hey, that person feels bad, therefore they shouldn't engage in that behavior. That's not what it is. It's saying if I want people to survive in my society, then I should amputate this leg for people's benefit because they'll be killed otherwise. So it is this big if, and that if is what you actually want out of society. It may be better on a purely survival scale if you have an old person who is hurt to just let them die or, exit them prematurely. It may be, better. You have to ask why the Eskimos were so wrong abandoning their elderly out in the ice floes kind of thing. Was that the right thing to do at that point?
So the reason why I am latched onto this idea is I'm listening to people talk about this moral quandary, the Hume's guillotine and whatnot. You
Yep.
can't derive an ought from an is, if then and whatnot, right? I'm trying to think how could you, right? And to me, it seems if you wanted to have an ought from an is, what you would need is an ought that is an ought that exists in reality, independent of anybody's mind. And to me, perpetual survival fits that goal. It is that a bill. It's a fact of reality that there is a goal that exists ubiquitously in all life forms to survive. And if that is the case, then blah blah blah. Moral systems.
Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that sort of survival drivers, though, we can largely overcome them with thought. Things like the fight or flight response kind of thing. There's fight, flight, fawn, freeze. I think there's another one that I'm not remembering. I think that we can sort of largely overcome them and then sort of maybe choose a different option. Although it depends if you're into hard determinism or not.
What are you?
I'm a compatibilist. I think that
Compatibilist.
sort of free will and determinism in the universe are compatible with one another.
Can I share my thoughts on that with you real quick? Just
Sure.
So I think that free will is not a thing that you are born with or given. I think that we are basically animals ruled by instinct and environment and whatnot until we get to a certain point of knowledge acquisition or maturity or whatever it is, where we have the ability to reflect on our actions in real time and make decisions, choosing amongst different options. But I think that by and large, the majority of people for a certain part of their lives experience no free will.
I'm not sure that's true. I think that why does it have to be in real time? May I ask?
Well, I mean, if you reflect on your choice after you've already made the choice, then you didn't have
Yes.
the ability to control it in the moment.
Yes, but the next choice you'll make is probably going to be different. That's the
And that's
whole.
where the free will develops. Like
Yes,
over time
that's-
and experience, you gain enough knowledge and maturity to be able to actually reflect on your decisions in real time and choose without being ruled by instincts or emotions.
Well, I think that all people, to a lesser or greater degree, do that. They will,
Right.
think about some situation. They may make the same action over again. They might be stuck in an endless cycle, but I think that is a product of free will, that they are free to do the same dumb thing they always did, kind of thing. Or they can choose, hey, I didn't like the outcome of this. I want to do something different. And even though largely we're habitual creatures, the whole point of, say, cognitive behavioral therapy is through reflecting on your actions, you can change future behaviors by changing the emotions and thoughts that come up. And that's been documented to work. So I think that might be where I would say free will would come from. But I mean, a hard determinist would just say, hey, it all depends on, stuff that's happened before and a whole load of priors. But I think it's perfectly compatible with determinism of solid objects to having free will. Although I have been watching a lot of Alex O'Connor lately, and he's kind of really pushing back against that. So, but anyway, back to the whole, so it's good we agree on free will and where that comes from, on sort of the reflective nature of, hey, this action I did had bad consequences. I don't want to do the same one again, kind of thing. Like we can update our information. But I just, but when you're sort of saying, hey, we've got this propensity to survive, we've got the best way to do something, and that's morality. I don't know. I think that it's still not like, but you think it's objective. You think it's mind independent on the goal that you're trying to get to, and
Yeah,
I'm sort of,
like
yeah.
for instance, regardless of how anybody else feels, the shortest distance for me to get to wherever I want to go that's a fact, right? Now I have to have, before that happens, I need to have the goal of getting there, right?
Yes.
But once I have that goal, that is the fact, right? And I'm just trying to say that the goal of survival is there. It's just already there. We don't need to worry about finding it. It's just there. So now, given that, what do we do next? I'm not trying to argue that morality is a feature of the universe in the way that electromagnetism or gravity is. Nothing like that. All I'm saying is that it's an interplay of of beings in action. It doesn't necessarily have to be too cognitive. I think the lower life forms can have something like that too. Like even bacteria probably have like certain responses to certain chemicals, just because that's what it is. What I want to say is that, and this might be a little crackpotty, admittedly, but I think that it would be better if people in general were more clear about the difference between ethics and morals, or morality, let's say, right? I think that when we say the word morals, we mean ethics, but when we say morality, we're referring to something deeper. I think that ethics is how you apply your sense of morality.
Yes.
I mean, maybe I don't think that is the way. I just think that's how we should use the word in a more utility, for more utility. To say that there's the right and the wrong. That's morality. Now, what do you do with that? That's ethics.
I still, so when you're saying that morality is the right or the wrong and how you do it, like, can you pass that for me? Like, because what we ought to do is the right or the wrong. So if I ought to take care of my neighbor or whatever, right? That's morality. So you're taking the ethicist stance, which is sort of how best you take care of your neighbor, right? Like the actual steps, the actual machinations for doing that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And I don't really have a problem with the ethics morality divide. I don't really have an issue with it. I guess that I'm getting at that, the survival drive, although it is strong, I don't see it as objective. Like nothing about it is objective as such.
What do you mean when you say that word objective in that sentence right there?
Stance independent. So independent of any stance I may have on it, whether, I feel like I should, or my stance is that I shouldn't. Objective means independent from anybody's stance. It just is. So, objective things are usually physical things because they're not dependent on anybody's, it's not up to my stance whether a mouse is there or not. It's my position on it doesn't really matter. It's going to be there regardless. And the people that sort of argue moral facts will say, hey, it's not, this nature of God, basically. It doesn't matter your stance on it. It's going to be there regardless of how you feel about it. But I guess I'm pointing out that with a survival mechanism, you can literally take a different stance on that and say, hey, I don't care about that, or I will embrace that, or I won't embrace that. Like a lot of our emotions, like say anger, for instance, or fear, we have a stance on it of how we act on it, essentially. So I'm not getting to how a survival instinct that can be overcome is necessarily objective.
So I would say that the instinct, the idea that you should survive, right, is not the idea that you should survive is not the fact that I'm pointing to. The fact that I'm pointing to is that you have that idea.
Yes. The instinct exists, but the question then becomes, why ought we follow that instinct?
I don't think we have a choice.
You don't think we have a choice?
No. By categorically, as living things, we follow that.
I don't think that's necessarily true on an individual level.
Well, as soon as you stop following that, you cease being living thing.
Well, I don't think you necessarily follow that on a population-wide level, as there is many organisms that have become extinct.
Well, that's just a failure to achieve your goal.
Sure. But why ought we achieve that goal?
So that's like, that's exactly the problem, right? That's where it becomes, if there was a way to say living things ought to have the idea to perpetually survive,
Yes.
then we would have moral reality, like a feature of the universe we could point to. That would be
Well,
something like
but
morality is
but
electromagnetism.
but that's moral realism.
Yeah. So I guess I don't think I can say I'm a realist then. It's something else. And maybe you can help me out with figuring that out. I asked GPT after I talked to it about my
Right.
moral
Right.
ideas for a long time. Said, "What do you think I am?" It said, "I think
Yeah.
you're a pragmatic moral realist." And I was like, "Okay, well, let me talk to Mark."
Yeah, no, I get that. I guess a an argument could be made. I mean, Graham Oppy, who's I admire a lot, a very good philosopher, sort of takes his position that sort of these evolutionary drives are sort of a form of moral realism that we can point to. I don't know. I don't think it is personally. I think that there's too much so looking at sort of our like what we're doing. I think that a lot of different people have a lot of different goals, and that they might not necessarily lead us towards survival, and rather will lead us straight into extinction. But I can't find anything objective, like stance independent, that says you shouldn't go extinct.
Yeah, I don't think that exists.
Well, then it's not objective that we should survive. It's the stance that we have that we want to survive. And I've got no problem with that. I've got absolutely no problem with that, right? Saying, hey, if we want to survive, here is the best way to get there, right? But that isn't an objective moral system. It's a subjective one. Actually, a term that's been used, and I can't remember the guy that did this, he was in a debate, but he used the term intersubjective. It's sort of agreed on between everybody kind of thing. And
Yeah,
for instance,
go
yeah,
ahead.
I could just, I know that because people will say like, oh, if morality isn't objective, you could just make up your own morality and just do whatever. But over a society, it doesn't matter how much I think it's right to steal, for instance. Like I can just decide that I want to steal and that's right. It doesn't matter how much I believe that. The morals of the society doesn't change to accommodate that, right? Like there's no change in how that's perceived by a society. So across a population, it's kind of agreed on between the members of the population. Like
Like
morality is
an inch.
intersubjective. Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I guess so. But
It,
I mean,
there's some, I don't know if it's equivocation or false equivalency. I'm not sure if that's even the fallacy at play here, but I feel like there's something going on here with that word objective. The way that we are
right.
using it's, I think we need to talk about that for a second, just
Mhm.
because I hear that word, I hear
Yeah.
it in juxtaposed against subjectivity, right?
Yes.
Stance dependency, right?
Mhm.
Um, I, as a subject, have my own perspective, and that is my subjective perspective because it's only mine. It's not objective because nobody else is sharing in it. Stop me if I'm saying something wrong.
Well, I mean, people can share your subjective opinion. We can both agree that, a Dapper Dino is amazing. It just because somebody else has the same subjective opinion, it doesn't make it objective. It's dependent on anybody's stance. So theists would get themselves into trouble because they sort of said, well, um, morality comes from God. He dictates what is moral and what is not. The problem there is that it's still subjective. The
Right,
subject being God, right? It's his
right.
opinion, right? And we then therefore we can have our own opinion, and they get into trouble, so they've got to rescue that somehow and patch some objective morality together. But so even if like I said, even if everybody in the world thinks ice cream is nice, right? Like everybody agrees, every single person agrees, it still isn't objectively true. It's still stance dependent. It's still a product of stances kind of thing. Like that's what it is.
Sure. But if everybody in the world agrees that this amount of matter is a kilogram, then we have an objective weight. We have a
Right.
thing to measure
Well,
things against.
no, I mean the kilogram is just a label, right? It's just, you can convert it to newtons, you can convert it to mass, you can convert it to anything you want. That will still have the same amount of mass, i.e. the same amount of atoms in it, which is giving it the weight, regardless of what anybody thinks, or even what measurement. You can call it X amount of ounces, you can call it kilograms, you can call it newtons, you can call it whatever you want. It's still going to have the same amount of mass, regardless of your stance upon it. The idea that the label kind of thing is has to be one thing. No, that's not the subjective part. The subjective part is if your stance really makes it what it is, which for weight, that has nothing to do with people's stance on it. It's
I have to
independent
disagree.
of that.
I think that
Okay, why is that?
the stance that we have is that this amount of matter, these number of atoms, should be what we call a kilogram.
Yes, but the amount of atoms is never going to change, regardless of what you call it.
It seems like you want. So, what you would be looking for is a physical reality that this moral measurement can count.
Well, I mean, that's a sort of crude way to put it, but sure, yeah, it's got to be independent of anybody's mind going, that is what it is, and that's
Right.
what I believe it to be, and it has to be independent of that mind, because everything else, like when you say a kilogram, that's just a label we put on things. That's just a label for how much weight or how much atoms or how much mass something has. It's just a label. The objective thing is the actual properties of that object, how many atoms it does in fact possess. And you can change between any label you want to describe that. The actual properties of that entity is never going to change. It's independent of anybody's thought on it. Like, I could believe in the wrong weight, that the actual weight of it still doesn't change.
So that makes me think like this. We could, like, I could right now, by myself and only with myself, I could create some kind of system. Let's call it the G. The unit is the G for goods. Whatever. There's
Gotcha.
An action has certain numbers of G's, right? Now I can define that G pretty much any way I want by myself. I could say the G is X number of years a person's life gets, the number of years that people live based on this, something like that. I don't know. Lives saved. We could do scales, percentages of self-reported joy and happiness, whatever it is, right? Whatever I want to define the G as. Once I do that, now we can say, okay, this thing right here, let's count how many blah, blah, blah. This is this number of G's. We could do that. And I'm saying that when it comes to morality as an idea of reality, we can take things in reality. We can try to we can make objective assessments of things with a subjective backdrop there, and that's just kind of how it is for everything. We have to subjectively decide what these measurements are, and then once we do that, we can gather objective data about it. And when we say objective in that sense, it's not really like this is a feature of reality. It's more like a social construct kind of thing.
Right. But age and years is an objective thing. Like, we put the label years on it, right? That, just like the kilograms, we put the label years on it. But the amount of time, sort of space-time, that creature experiences or that organism experiences, that is an objective thing. It doesn't matter my stance on it. It's going to, go through time exactly as it goes through, according to the laws, physics of the universe. It doesn't matter what I believe about it. But there comes the question, why is the amount of years what we're striving for here? Why is it that we want to have the most amount of time, or survival of humans, or any of these things in as a meta-ethical concept? Why do we want to, or why ought we attempt to get to this goal? So the problem isn't that we can't quantify objective measurements to sort of, evaluate things. That's not the problem. I don't think that's the problem at all. We obviously can. We obviously do. The
Right.
question is why we ought to be trying to achieve anything at all. What is the goal that we're trying to get to? And that, I think, is subjective. That is, I think, people go and say, okay, well, I want to have a life that's filled with, as much money as possible, or I want a, country that is prosperous, or I want to serve my country, or I want to believe in God and, grant his glory, kind of thing. And I think that all different people are choosing way different goals, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah. So it's certainly more complicated than we can ever hash it out right now. I feel like I need to really consider your points a little bit more carefully and try to articulate my position a little bit better. But I want to ask you about your arguments with theists. I'm sure you've had them bring up the idea that atheists. In fact, I know that in the last debate with Praise, he actually
absolutely.
brought up. We as atheists have no grounds to argue for the immorality of their God or anything else because we are moral anti-realists. And he says that we're all that way, and I disagree. Obviously, that's not true.
But that's not true.
For you and your stance, how do you deal with, like, do you consider the actions of the God of the Bible immoral? And if so,
yes.
Considering that that's a different culture and context and blah blah blah, are you moved at all by that argument?
No, because the whole point is I don't think anybody has objective morality. I think everybody has subjective goals, and they've chosen their goals to be to bring about the glory of God on earth and whatever other nonsense they're spouting, kind of thing. And so they're trying to get to that goal, which I think conflicts with a lot of different moral systems, including secular humanism, which sort of says, hey, everybody should have, sort of everyone's an equal stakeholder in this world. Like, we're all humans, so we all should have an equal say, where they want to prioritize their church because they believe it brings about the glory of God. So you get a lot of sort of, conflict between these moral systems. But, just sort of saying, hey, I've got objective morality, does that actually make it true? Does that actually make it true? No, of course not. It doesn't. There's something called the Euthyphro dilemma, which I go to a lot, which is it's an ancient Greek dilemma where they basically say, well, does morality come from the mind of God? Does God decide what morality is, or does God get it from some other place and then pass it on to humans? And if God decides what morality is, then you don't have objective morality either. It's subjective.
Absolutely subjective.
Right, it's absolutely subjective, because God could change his mind tomorrow about what it is, communicate that, and suddenly it's moral. That's subjective. The other thing is, the other prong of this dilemma is that if God gets it from somewhere else, then you've got to show where he gets it from. Like, then you're just kicking the can down the road, because God,
if he gets it from somewhere else, then he's totally superfluous.
Right, and he doesn't create morality. A lot of them go to God's nature, but then that provides further problems, right? Which is, for a start, God doesn't have control over his own nature, which is sort of, for an omnipotent God, that's just weird. God has no control over morality, and for an omnipotent God, that's just weird. There's also problems like in the Bible, according to his nature, he, does some pretty horrendous stuff. So if you're going to get your morality from his nature, then why is that wrong to do if it's in his nature? Right. So a lot of them will then go back to, well, that's for God. We've got our own, set of rules that God gives it. And it's like, well, then you're not getting it from God's nature. You're getting it from the commandments of God, which makes it subjective. So this sort of shell game of, oh, well, it's objective because it comes from God's nature. It's exactly that. It's a shell game.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all.
It makes no sense, because when you actually pursue down these routes, it quickly becomes evident that they just are saying it's objective, but they can't actually substantiate it or even make it coherent at all. So it's very strange, because it doesn't align with the other properties that God is supposed to have. So it sort of falls down really hard. As for whether God is moral, I think he is one of the most immoral characters in the Bible. But the question then becomes, why should we pay attention to my morality? Why should we use one person's morality over another? Because obviously there are different moral codes. You talk about the morals of Japan. They're different than the morals of America, right? If you don't stand to the left on an escalator in Japan, I think that's in Kyoto, and it's right in Tokyo. I can't remember. I haven't been there for years and years. But if you don't stand on one side of the elevator, they'll get really upset. And I mean really upset. If you walk in a bike lane in the Netherlands, they will get absolutely furious at you. Furious. And I learnt that very quickly, the hard way, and never did it again. Like, morals vary from place to place on how we ought to be doing things to make that goal. So
the reason why I ask,
the
reason why I ask is because I obviously critique the Bible, right? We, as an atheist, edge, right? And when I read about the actions of the God of the Bible, I see, like, letting the Israelites take the virgin girls as their sex slaves and whatnot. Right. I look at that and I say, that's absolutely immoral. Oh, yes. I probably shouldn't say absolutely, but I would definitely say it is immoral, right? I often tell Christians, when they tell me I should become a Christian, I say, as soon as you can explain to me how that is moral, I'll become a Christian. And the reason why I say that it's immoral is because I believe that there is a such thing as right and wrong. If I was to suddenly be convinced that there's no such thing as right and wrong, I'd have to abandon that belief and think, well, it's okay. It's their time, it's their culture.
Well, that's exactly what presentism says. So presentism is when we look back in history and basically go, well, they didn't know any better, kind of thing. They didn't know any better at all. So what makes it wrong in that context? Well, I think it's wrong because it doesn't get me to what I want, which is the well-being of humans and humanity, right? So if they had known better, sort of, creating a nation of all these disparate people to overcome things and working with them probably would have been a lot more effective than sort of, going in and killing them and taking, all of their children, kind of thing. But, they didn't know any better. That's the thing. Right. Like, morality isn't something that we've just, we've had since the start, no matter what the Bible believers tell you. This has been a long trial and error process where things have gone horribly wrong. And it is interesting how often the morality of theists line up with what they want to do, what they emotionally want to do, their desires, their impulses, their base lusts or whatever. Morality seems to line up with what exactly they want to do, whatever that is. And then they find apologetics to make it feasible in their sort of, moral framework. The prosperity gospel, for instance, like, how can you be a Jesus believer and then accrue money, and basically go, well, God wants me to have this money. You find exceptions for it in your moral framework. And so they think it's completely moral.
Yeah, it's amazing how they do those mental gymnastics. It's truly astonishing. I think
it depends on what you want, though. Like, so should you listen to my morality? Maybe. If you do want to live in a flourishing society where people are well, then yes. If you don't, then there's nothing objective stopping you from not listening to me and, going out and breaking the law and stuff. But I don't think that's just me. I think that is a intersubjective agreed thing that we want to have a stable, functioning society in which people live. And that's the pragmatism part that you were talking about. We want not just to survive, but to have a stable society that we can live in and, not be persecuted or oppressed or have these things happen to us, even if that is good for our survival.
Right. I understand. I still think that it is not as a purely subjective thing. I am still convinced that whatever morality is, it's something that exists on the level of the population, and it is a function of their interactions. But I do see how when we talk about morality as far as specific codes of conduct, it's definitely not objective or real in any kind of way. There's definitely a lot of context and things that go into that. I do think that I feel like there's some kind of semantic key that could just totally bring us on the exact same page, but I don't have it right now, so I'll be looking for it.
I wouldn't be opposed to sort of like, I really would like to, and I say this with absolute honesty, I really would like there to be, we have a inherent biologically driven goal within us to reach kind of thing. Like that sounds really nice. That sort of, hey, we're all on the same page about this one thing. I just don't see it. That's all. I think it'd be great to have. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I would want that, but in I've got a long history of not believing things that I want to be true, but things that actually are true, and nothing yet has convinced me that there is a stance independent objective that all people have, or at least intersubjectively we share. It seems to be, to me at least, that people have a wide range of different goals, and we sort of find compatibility between them. Like, for instance, I was having this chat with, I think it was James Apperson, really good chat, actually. I should upload it. It's been sitting in my drive for ages. But like, if you have a Christian and they think God has commanded them to take care of people and look out for the well-being of people, right? And I've just said, hey, I've chosen human well-being because that is something that I've chosen, not arbitrarily, but that's what I feel like doing, right? That makes me feel good. It makes me happy. I like a society. It's just my subjective opinion. 99.9% of our morals will agree, because we can say, hey, feeding people is good for that, right? So that's what we want to do. Having a social safety net, all of these things will line up, because like you said, actually, I think that the actual the morals to get you to those end goals is, I wouldn't say objective, but kind of objective. Like
it's like
way.
Once you have the goal, there is definitely a real best way to get there.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. So, I can think, okay, I want human well-being. Did my blowing up at work and chewing somebody out achieve that? No, it doesn't, right? That's bad for their psychological health. So that's something I ought not do. But, I can't change that in the past. So, I try not to do it in the future, because that's what I ought to do. So, but, there's this whole idea of well-being, the Christian that thinks God commanded them, and, me who thinks that I just chose human well-being, there's no problem with us coexisting in a society, because we will share so many of the same, oughts, that we'll just live together, create laws that are essentially the same. There's no problem with that. The problem comes when, say, it's a conflicting moral sentiment, like, they want to ostracize and denigrate certain segments of the population, in a bigoted way. And I say, hey, that's bad for humans. And then they sort of say, yeah, but that's what God wants. That is moral according to God's nature. And at that point, it's like I can't even have a conversation with that person, because I'm sort of going, okay, well, I've got this objective and you've got the objective of, say, the end of the world and everyone gets raptured up and, Jesus will come down and save all of us kind of thing. And that's your objective. At that point, a moral conversation feels like arguing with somebody's imaginary friend. There's no way I can sort of say, hey, feeding people is really good because your God says that taking care of people is good. Like, I can't have that conversation with them,
I just
because
think
if
that
they're like,
theists have totally hijacked the conversation, the vernacular, everything about this situation is just
right,
totally theistically contaminated, because we have, because of the way that they've set this whole thing up, we think about these things in these terms of absolutes, of universality, of dictates and laws, when it's not like that necessarily, right? It could just be uh, as simple as setting up the rules of a game or creating a government.
right,
Um,
right,
the law is, it's a thing that
yeah,
exists.
yeah,
It's uh, a culmination or a conflagration of subjective ideas that have been
yeah,
codified, and now you can
absolutely,
refer to it. I think that objectivity is something that we do. It's like we create objectivity when we decide that a certain number of atoms is this unit, and now we can measure against it. When we decide that this is the law, and now we can prosecute people against it. It's there's a sense of the word objectivity that we're not using necessarily when it comes to this moral conversation that I think that we should be using.
I disagree. There's nothing objective about the law. It's entirely subjective. It's a social construct. It's something that everybody's stance on really contributed to and we agreed to. So essentially, we get into things like the social contract, basically. That we allow people to make laws over us in exchange for protection and certain rights that they have to uphold, kind of thing. But that's a social construct as well. There's a lot of these things that are social constructs. I mean, America's a social construct. There's
But
no actual border there. It doesn't exist as such. We've just decided that's where it is, right?
yeah,
These social constructs, that they exist, but they're not objective. They're not real.
see, that's where I'm getting hung up, right? When you say it's not
Right.
objective, right? My stance has nothing to do with the law. I can have all the opinions in the world. Like I said, that this law is evil. I can have whatever I want to
Yes.
think about the law, but that doesn't
Yes.
change the law. And no one person's stance can change the law. It would take a effort and actions to change it.
Right.
So I
But
feel like the word objective does apply there, at
but
least in
if
certain
if
senses.
but if the culture changes and all the legislatures, people's stance changes, right? They now believe that it's okay to, I don't know, to not pay your taxes or whatever, and they legislate that. Isn't that entirely stance dependent?
What is objective? Well, give me an example of what you would call a definite objective thing.
The location of my coffee cup.
The location of your coffee cup.
Yes.
Okay, so like you measure the location of your coffee cup in terms of your address and
No, no,
uh,
no, 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 no,
other
no.
objects.
No, no, my address is subjective, but the location of my coffee cup in space time is objective. It doesn't matter how any amount of people can think that my coffee cup's in the sink right now. Any amount of people can agree that my coffee cup's in the sink. It's not going to be there. It's objectively right here.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay.
Like, there's a lot of things in societies that are ubiquitous, right? We all kind of agree on them, kind of thing, like laws and things like that, and we think of them as objective, but they're not. They're just created by people's stance. A lot of the ideas of America were created by the founding fathers, who all shared the same sort of vision on what they wanted the country to be, and they were representing the people of that country. But that country as such, the physical land exists and the physical things that make up the border exist. But the country, the idea of America doesn't exist. It's just a concept. It's a social construct that we have made a concept and given that sort of power by people adopting that same stance, that same belief, that same principle that flows on from there. There's nothing objective about it. There's nothing real about it. It doesn't exist in the real world, but it sure as shit exists as a concept, right? And more than that, it sort of exists as a construct that we have given value to. So the laws, they don't exist in the real world, but if you violate them, there's some very real consequence.
Yeah, I think that I really think this is a semantic thing, because like when you say that, I think, okay, at some point this becomes objective.
No, because if stances change on it, and don't forget that at one point slavery was objectively right. Legally, it was objectively legal.
It was objectively
In that
legal,
case.
right? It was certainly objectively legal. Here, there's a comment here that I want to highlight real quick, because I think it kind of helps with what I'm trying to make the point of, and maybe you can just tell me what you would say to this guy. So Kentucky Atheist says, if you sit down for a game of chess and there are a set of rules that you agree to obey, which makes those objective rules for that game, but those rules were decided subjectively. That's along the lines of what I'm going here.
Yeah, but that's like, so I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying, right? But what that lends to is saying the rules are objective, right? Because, but they're not. They're subjective. It depends on your stance of how chess should be played. For instance, you could easily agree with the other person that you don't like en passant, right? I don't know if you've heard that term. It's just a chess term. En passant. You don't like it.
Let's not middle line.
Yeah. Yep. Let's not use it, right? Let's just throw that rule out. Look, I'm a purist. I'll use it. Anyway, you might agree, like, you don't like that rule and throw it out. So the rules are entirely subjective between what you agree on. Like, that is true. So I get what you mean, that once you've decided on them, those rules, that it seems like they're objective, but I refrain from saying that because they're not objective. They're not.
I see what you mean. I really do. Like, I get why you're saying that. And it's I'm very at a loss for words or ideas, I guess, to kind of bridge the gap and find a reconciliation. I don't think you're wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong either.
Right. And I get what people mean. Like, but I sort of once, I guess I got caught because I sort of said, well, once you agree on what you're trying to get to, then it's objective kind of thing of how you get there. That kind of statement about moral frameworks and flowing on from, if you have a moral framework, like where you're trying to get to, just say human well-being, then what you ought to do becomes objective, but it doesn't. That's the thing. It never becomes objective because the actual foundation for it is entirely subjective. So I avoid saying that. I totally understand. We need a new word for it. I don't know if that exists in philosophy. I mean, I'm just a dabbler in philosophy, but
me too.
Maybe that does work. Like a something that is objective once a subjective agreement is reached, kind of thing, like an objective path to a subjective goal. But the mistake would be saying that morality is therefore objective, because it can never be, with that end point being subjective. And that's the position I find myself in. I can't claim that morality is objective, because as long as I think that end goal is dependent on the stance of the people that come up with it, I can't
totally
claim
understand
that.
And I would probably use different words. I would say, something like morality exists because all the things that experience existence have better and worse ways of behaving, or they feel better or worse about them, whatever, right? That's the morality, and that's it. And then what you do with that, the ethical implications thereof, those things are totally subjective to me, and you can just make them up as you go and see what works and throw it out as it goes, experiment. But I still think that they're, the concept good and bad refer to actual states.
I don't think that's the case. I think good and bad refers to things that draw you towards that goal and things that hinder your getting to that goal. So right. I think that sort of with human well-being, feeding people starving in Africa is a good thing because it gets you more of that human well-being. So it's a utilitarian thing, while restricting food access is a bad thing because it doesn't get you towards human well-being. In fact, it will move you away from it.
Right. And I would also say, just to throw this point in there, if there were no beings alive, if there were no humans, nothing alive, there would be no such thing as morality. Obviously, nothing. And if you're the only one alive, like let's say you're the only living creature in the universe, there's no such thing as morality. You do whatever you want. Nobody can be hurt.
I disagree.
You disagree?
Because I think human well-being includes your own. So, taking care of yourself would be the moral thing to do, while sort of letting yourself be in pain or, sort of not well, not taking care of yourself would probably be immoral to me.
That's interesting that you would say that, given what you said before.
Well, I think morality and sort of, so my idea of well-being does include your own well-being, right? It's not this completely selfless, well, I'm going to do whatever for humanity. It's understanding that, hey, I have well-being to look after as well. And so I see it as good if you go to the gym and things like that. However, that's not to say you're immoral if you don't do that. It's just, we also have to talk about moral obligations versus moral virtue. For instance, the idea that if you give to charity, for instance, you're morally virtuous. But if you don't give to charity, it doesn't make you a moral monster, right? So that would be a moral virtue, okay? Where moral obligations are like, if you, don't unalive somebody, that's moral. If you do, that is absolutely immoral. Like you have an obligation not to do that thing in order to be a moral creature. Whereas you don't have to give to charity in order to be a moral creature. And I think that distinction sort of gets lost in these conversations sometimes, that we're not sort of saying everything is equal where it comes to moral decisions. Like if you litter, you're the same as somebody that breaks in and does something to a granny or something. No, nobody's saying that.
No, definitely not. And I think that would you like to have anything? I'm gonna give you the last word. So I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Do you want to have anything else to say? Or I also would like to say, if anybody in the chat wants to ask Mark or myself a question, go right ahead.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. No, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I so moral realism is something that I really want to believe, and I'd love to be convinced of. I really think that, I would love there to be a moral realism for humans in the world, and survival is a pretty good thing to sort of bring up, and I think that it's, and at the end of the day, it's more than possible to disagree completely and still have moral compatibility. So it's not so important to me, because as long as we can agree, hey, the flourishing of humanity, if you base it around the flourishing of humanity because you believe that it is a objective, compulsion of every living creature, we'll be on the same page about 99.9% of the time. Like, it's not really important to me where that morality comes from, right? Like, it doesn't really matter. So what I'm looking for is not identical moral beliefs. What I'm looking for is moral compatibility with people. So I can get along fine with a Christian. I can get along fine with a Muslim. I can get along fine with a Hindu. All of these things I can get along with as long as they prioritize human well-being. And most people do. Some theists don't. And they want the end of the world, and they want, all of these things. And that's where we have the problem. Because I think that's antithetical to what I and a large section of the population want. And it's not really fair for you to harm people based upon this, I want, the world to end and rapture and, fire and brimstone or whatever the hell you feel.
Amen. So Titan Uranus, hey, nice to see you, Titan. They have a question for you, Mark. Emus?
It's emus.
Emus?
It is emus. Yeah, sorry, dude. It's an Australian thing. Look, they are the most evil creatures alive, and they also kicked our ass in a war, which is just hilarious to everybody concerned. Do not bring up the immoral bird of evil.
The evil bird.
Evil birds. If you've ever met one, they can be really, really nasty, but they can be really nice as well, actually. Emus can be nice. But have you ever heard the call of one? It is
No.
horrifying. It is horrifying. It sounds like a freaking dinosaur. I'm not even joking. It is a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys have them just running around everywhere there, huh?
I wouldn't say everywhere. They're definitely out in the bush, though. Like, so out in the country areas, they're roaming around. Sometimes huge packs, but yeah.
You
Emus, man.
You have you have frequent encounters with spiders or any of those other more deadly creatures?
Oh, mate, I've got a picture. I've got it somewhere on my hard disk. It's basically a children's playground with a beware of snake thing right in front of it. I'm not even joking. Like tiger snakes, incredibly venomous kind of snakes, like right in front of it. It's wild. I've seen tiger snakes. They're very grumpy. We leave them alone. Spiders, yeah. It's the smaller ones you've got to watch out for. The big ones are fine. Like, I love huntsmen. Huntsmen are awesome. They're massive. Like, they're about the size of your hand. They're massive. But they're actually, really calm. They'll eat the smaller spiders, which are dangerous. They're actually lovely spiders. Like, they're actually really nice.
Do any of you guys keep them as pets?
Yeah, huntsmen. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. That sounds cool.
I don't, but yeah, other people do. I don't have a problem with spiders in my house. They generally eat other insects and stuff. They're okay. There's certain ones that you don't want to see, like white tails and the redback spider is a bit horrifying, but I
got another question for you from Kian Aris. They say, I'm sorry for mispronouncing that if I am. Question for Mark. You don't think the golden rule is a result of an objective morality, since it's arguably foundational to human ethical and moral codes that seem to be part of all the world's religious and spiritual traditions?
Yeah, I think that the golden rule is a product of reciprocity. So we see this feeling that things should be fair. Like if and there's a wonderful video with the capuchin monkeys again, where they put a rock and the monkey takes the rock, hands it back, and he gets a grape, which they love. They absolutely love grapes. And the other monkey in the cage beside it does the same thing, but he only gets cucumber, which they don't like so much. And the one getting cucumber will take the cucumber, pretty happy with it, eats it. The other one gets a grape, and the first capuchin monkey watches this. And then when he gets another cucumber, he cracks the shit. Like, he absolutely goes enraged that he isn't getting the same thing for the same work. So reciprocity is really important. It basically is our sense of fairness. If I do one thing and get something, you should get the same thing, which, underlines the golden rule. But I think this feeling of reciprocity, number one, it kind of ceases to occur outside of our social in-group. To our out-group, we don't give a flying fudge what happens to them. We're just like, whatever. You can be mean and nasty to the people that we don't see as part of our group as much as you want, and it doesn't hold. But even if we all agreed on it, I don't see it as objective. Like it's subjective based upon our feelings of how we feel when we're violated. So two things happening: reciprocity, I should get the same thing, and empathy. You feel that way that I feel when you don't get the same thing, right? That when it's unequal. So it's two things at play here. Where I don't think that it necessarily translates into codifying it into the golden rule. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think there's other cultures and religions which sort of haven't had the golden rule, like Incas, for instance, or civilizations with a elite class like the Spartans with their the Spartan warriors and the Helots, their slave class kind of thing. I don't think it necessarily translates over to every single culture the same way that it's advocated for in sort of Christianity. And I mean, even in Christianity, they made up the rule and then they persecuted people throughout the ages. So I'm not even sure how that translates into a moral system, because they don't even seem to follow it a great deal of the time.
When I think of that golden rule, it occurs to me that just because I want somebody to treat me a certain kind of way does not mean other people would enjoy that at all.
Well,
I might
that's
be a person
correct.
who wants to get punched in the face just because I like it.
Well,
Some people
there's a
like to be slapped.
yeah, and if you would like to have a fight with somebody, then you would look at it as, if I want to treat you the same as I want you to treat me. If I want to get into a fight with you, then I should start a fight, right? There's a problem there, right? There's a
Hmm.
better one actually, which is a negative one. Don't do unto others that which you don't want to have done to yourself, kind of thing. So that's a lot superior morally, because you're not doing things to other things, but it doesn't sort of necessitate a behavior that may be self-destructive or something like that. So it
Right.
is actually a superior one. But
I never thought about that. You're right. The golden rule, as it's presented, is a impetus, a positive action you're supposed to take. It's not necessary.
correct.
It doesn't say anything about not doing things.
Right.
That's crazy. Okay, well, looks like we're out of questions. Anything? Do you have any new projects coming out, Mark, or any more debates that you're going to do sometime?
Not really. I'm trying to get a debate lined up with somebody. I might talk to you about that. I think we were agreeing. I'm not sure what time it would be for you, but I'll have a talk on Discord with you. It's some guy challenging me to a debate, and he's being a bit vocal, so I might have to do that. Oh, I do have an interview on my channel with Apostate Sisters coming up. That is at 11 p.m. my time, or 11 a.m. Your time tomorrow. I guess Eastern time is the easiest to put it in. I'm 12 hours.
I saw that on
So
your page. And it didn't register to me that was upcoming. So okay.
yeah, that's upcoming. So Nancy and Patty are the Apostate Sisters, a couple of really, really lovely girls that have escaped a cult. The Worldwide Church of something. I can't remember the name. God, that's terrible. Yeah, just horrible sort of thing. But they're fantastic. They're absolutely fantastic. I'm a big fan. So that
Do you know which cult by any chance?
Worldwide Church of God, I think. I would have to check that.
I'm titillated.
Yeah, it's sort of yeah. So it's Armstrong, Herbert W. Armstrong created. Yeah, it is Worldwide Church of God. So he kind of was, it basically it's a cult, like 100%, and it's still going as well. It's just changed its name. I think it's changed name to Grace Communion International. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, it's basically one of those very fundamentalist, very overbearing kind of. I mean, it's a cult. Let's face it. Let's call a spade here.
Oh yeah, I was raised in the Jehovah's Witnesses. I've heard and researched a lot about cults, and I do believe that Jehovah's Witnesses are one as well.
Yeah, Scientology, definitely. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I heard of this church not too long ago. I feel like there's like some celebrity that was in it, but whatever. That's fine. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Oh, let me see. Is this? No. Okay. Yes. I thought I put your channel in the description. If I didn't, I will make sure that it's in there as soon as we end. But please go and subscribe to Mark if you're not already. You probably are.
Oh, thank you.
And please like and subscribe this video if you could. And I think that's all we have for you guys tonight.
Well, I found out I was not subscribed to you. I went over to the thing today, and I'm like, no. Was I kicked off? I don't know. Like, that's terrible, and I'm so sorry. I absolutely thought I was.
I really appreciate the subscription. Thank you so much.
No, not at all. I thought I was already subscribed. I feel cheated that I haven't been all this time. Like, I really do. I feel very, very upset.
It's totally fine. And I am sorry to everybody who was watching now that has been missing these shows. I'm sorry that my personal issues get in the way of doing these things, and I'm going to do my best to get us up to 10,000 subscribers before the end of this year for sure. So I've got a conversation with Ben Burgess coming up. I've got a conversation with Ken Amini. Who else? There's one other conversation I have in the work. Oh, Sal. I'm going to have Sal Cordova on at some point, and Muji.
Sal. Yeah.
Yeah, you had a conversation with him too recently, too, didn't you? Or not recently, but it was a while ago.
Yeah, I debated him on something. I can't remember what, but yeah, Sal's Sal. I mean, yeah.
He's got a video. We're going to play his video entirely, and then I've got the video already. I'm going through it and making notes, and I'm going to just try to go through it carefully as I can. Being a lay person in relative to him is not going to be easy, but I'm going to try to push back as much as I can.
Okay, well, I want to give big thanks to Titan Uranus, who's actually doing the modding work of the Lord, putting my and everybody's links in
everybody's.
the chat.
Yes, Titan Uranus is a big part of this channel and many other channels, as far as I know. And thank you so much for your moderation and for always showing up, Titan. I would love to have you on the show sometime just to introduce each other. You know, I've never met you in real life, but okay, so that's it then. We're gonna wrap it up. It's the bridges we build, not the bridges we burn, that give us the edge. So thank you all so much, and y'all have a great night.